listening to Turning Hard Times into Good Times with your host, Jay Taylor. If you have a question or comment about today's show, Jay would love to hear from you at 1-866-472-5790. That's 1-866-472-5790. You can also send an email to questionsfortaylor@gmail.com. That's questions, the number 4, Taylor@gmail.com. Now, back to our program.
Welcome to this special segment of Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm really glad to have with me once again Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He's here to talk about an eye-catching article that he wrote this weekend titled, "Has Turkey Just Started World War III?" Thanks for joining me again, Daniel.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me back.
It's really good to have you as always, although the topic is worrisome to say the least. All of the candidates for president claim to have as their number one goal the defeat of ISIS. And it's supposed to be something both Democrats and Republicans claim they're really going to do when they get into the White House. Vladimir Putin claims to have the same goal, but I think it was Jeb Bush the other day in a debate said that he's not doing anything. And that's not his purpose. His purpose is to go to Syria to expand Russian influence in the Middle East. Yet I read conflicting reports, from places, not the mainstream, but from non-mainstream sources like Zero Hedge, where I get the impression that Russia has been far more effective in defeating ISIS in Syria than the United States has been. Give me what you think about that topic. Who's doing the job and who isn't in terms of defeating ISIS in Syria?
Well, I think we should back up a little bit because this is sort of a straw man in a way because the U.S. has made it all about ISIS, but it was never all about ISIS. And the Russians made it clear from the very beginning when they were invited in by the Syrians, the Syrian government, to help out. This is a battle against not just ISIS, but ISIS and the al-Qaeda affiliated groups like the Nusra Front and the Jaish al-Islam, da-da-da-da-da. There are dozens and dozens of them that are affiliated to different degrees with al-Qaeda. And let's not forget, ISIS itself is an offshoot of al-Qaeda.
Sure.
Al-Qaeda, or think of it this way, al-Qaeda are the Trotskyites. They want to expand the Wahhabist revolution worldwide, whereas ISIS are the Stalinists. They want to create the caliphate in one state, in one place first. So the Russian goal has always been to defeat both terrorist groups, all terrorist groups in Syria. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, looking at what Russia has done, it did not start out targeting ISIS per se. It started out attacking groups in the west and northwest of Syria, which were predominantly al-Qaeda-oriented groups, Nusra Front and that sort of thing. And there is, I'm not a military strategist, but if you look at a map and you look at what they were trying to do with their bombing, it was very clear they were trying to break supply lines of al-Qaeda.
Uh-huh.
But now what we've seen in the past couple of days is and you mentioned Zero Hedge, actually Zero Hedge, I think has written about it, but Moon of Alabama is also very good, and they've called it the race to Raqqa. And Raqqa is in the center of the country, and it is the headquarters of ISIS, and the Syrian Arab army, backed by the Russian air power, is racing to the center of ISIS's power, and that is what's freaking Turkey out, and the U.S. to a degree as well, because Syria is on the verge between going to Raqqa and also retaking Aleppo, the largest population center in Syria, which looks imminent. That will be essentially the defeat of the armed Islamic rebels in Syria. And that, I think, is why we're seeing so much activity over the last couple of days.
Well, activity from Saudi Arabia and Turkey, as you point out in this article. And, I remember seeing supply lines that you talked about, oil going from ISIS being sold and transported into Turkey. Is the Turks want to continue receiving that oil? What's their beef?
That's part of it. They were certainly enjoying that, and they were reselling it. There were customers as far as Israel and elsewhere who were buying that cheap oil. But it's larger than just the oil and the smuggling. This is something that Turkish President Erdogan has invested himself in for several years. He has essentially staked his entire presidency on overthrowing the Syrian government. He did an about-face on his initial policy of zero problems with neighbors and decided on a policy of tons of problems with neighbors. And as he sees the foreign policy that he staked his entire presidency on literally going down in flames with the defeat of the terrorists essentially in Syria, I think he is getting desperate and backed into a corner, and I think that is why, hence the title, has Turkey just started World War III?
Well, I want to get to Turkey, but also Saudi Arabia is sending supposedly some 150,000 troops into Syria to allegedly fight ISIS. But as you point out in your article, there's some reasons to be very skeptical that that's really their intention. Tell us why.
Well, the Saudis have funded and trained Al Qaeda and ISIS and the various Sunni extremist groups from the very beginning. So the idea that they're going in to take out the people that they have been supporting and continue to support doesn't pass the laugh test. But also the whole idea that Saudi Arabia is going to man a 150,000 strong army when it's getting its rear end kicked in Yemen by the poorest country in the region is a laugh as well. In fact, in Yemen, remember, they had to import 10,000 African troops, African mercenaries, because they couldn't handle it on their own. So I think this is probably a bluff, hopefully a bluff. And I think that's underscored by the fact that the Saudis said, okay, we're ready to do this, but we want U.S. troops to lead. So you guys go out first, and we'll be right behind you, promise. So I think it's somewhat less likely. However, that's still on the table, and Defense Secretary Ashton Carter gave a thumbs up to the Saudi plan. Is it a big bluff? Probably, but at this point, it's difficult to know.
No, okay, but what really worries you, though, is this issue of what took place last Saturday from Turkey. They fired on the Kurds, right? Can you talk to us? Why is that so problematic? Give us the background on that.
Well, as a matter of fact, as we speak, Jay, they are probably still shelling Syria. This is the third straight day that Turkey is attacking Syria. They're attacking not only the YPG Kurdish groups, which they consider to be terrorists, but actually the U.S. considers to be very close allies. The U.S. has viewed them as boots on the ground for U.S. policy against ISIS. So you essentially have a NATO member country attacking the allies of another NATO member country in Turkey. And even more bizarre, Jay, is the fact that they're bombing these Kurds because they've just taken over a military base that had been occupied by ISIS. So they're really bombing to make it easier for ISIS to take back over this base. That's what the Turks are doing. And they're also, and this is even more troubling, they're actually for the first time shelling Syrian government positions inside Syria. So this is absolutely an act of war against Syria, directly an act of war. There's not much Syria can do right now, but there is another country that we both know that's been involved in Syria since the fall, and that's Russia. And Russia has spent a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of its clout in assisting Assad to shore up his country. It's hard to imagine that they're going to sit by and watch the Syrian army on the verge of defeating Al-Qaeda in Aleppo to be itself attacked by neighboring Turkey. What is going to happen? I honestly think it's not even weeks. I think it's just hours that we'll be watching to see what the next step is. We haven't heard a thing from Russia yet, really, although there was an emergency phone call between Putin and President Obama yesterday.
This is really frightening in a way because I just can't understand, how could Russia let Syria go? I mean, Russia has to be concerned about its own sovereignty in this whole thing, I would think.
Well, also, Russia just yesterday, I think, suffered an attack in its extreme southern part that ISIS took credit for. So these ISIS troops in Syria are dispersing. Ironically, a lot of them are going to Libya. That's a place that we're supposed to have liberated.
Yes.
But there's lots of them in Libya now, but some of them are going to go home to Russia because a lot of them came from Russian territory. So Russia has not just the issue of its credibility, but it'll become an existential issue if you have these battle-hardened Islamist rebels returning to Russia to we all remember the bombings in Moscow and elsewhere in Russia.
Sure.
And this nightmare could very well reemerge in Russia. So they certainly have a national security reason, which we would certainly feel the same way if we were in their shoes, I would say.
Well, I would think so. It just seems to me that it's impossible to expect Russia not to react to this, not to respond to Turkey's actions here. Can you see any way where Putin could back down on this, Daniel?
Well, I think Russia has shown a considerable amount of constraint after the shoot-down of the Russian jet fighter, which the Turks claim it was over Turkish territory. Even by their own claims, if it was literally, I think, 7 seconds. So the Russians did nothing but sanctions. However, they did beef up their air defenses. They brought in the S-400s, surface-to-air missiles. They beefed up their defenses. They brought in the Sukhoi 25s, 25s, a much more sophisticated fighter jet. So they are preparing to respond, but they have shown restraint. If a single Russian advisor or officer on the ground in Syria is hit by Turkish rocket fire, then I think that constraint, that restraint will go by the wayside.
Well, it's really something that warrants close attention. I think anybody who cares about the world they live in has to keep track of this, and I would suggest that people should go to ronpaulinstitute.org, ronpaulinstitute.org, and you'll be writing about this sort of thing and keeping people up to date on it, I'm sure, Daniel, won't you?
Definitely. We're watching it very closely. This is the most serious thing, I think, since we started the Institute in 2013.
I have no doubt about it, and hence the reason I wanted to have you come on and do this special segment today. I also would like to just tell my listeners that there's a lot of other really important things that are there as well. There's an article, I guess actually an interview that you did, you and Dr. Paul did with Mike Lofgren, I believe his name is, and he's written a book called The Deep State, The Fall of the Constitution and the Rise of a Shadow Government. I think a very, very important discussion, and people can go there and watch that interview at the ronpaulinstitute.org. And also an interesting article that's there as well about an Amish farmer in Kentucky. And I say that as a person who came from an Amish country, Ohio, where there were a huge number of Amish, and I grew up as a Mennonite, so I'm very much familiar with the culture of those people back there in Ohio and elsewhere. This is in Kentucky. But the FDA really coming in sort of a criminal manner and taking away the rights of these people. I think Americans need to wake up and realize what's going on. And the Ron Paul Institute really provides a lot of information, not only in geopolitical issues, but in domestic issues like this as well. So I want to thank you very much, Daniel, for being with me and updating, and I hope we can talk again. Let's hope we have some good news and that cooler heads will prevail. But, when people are when it comes to money and oil and some of these issues and sovereign nations and empires, when they get too big for their britches, they do things sometimes that bring about results that aren't the happiest. So in any event, thank you very much, Daniel, for being with us, and we'll look forward to doing it again sometime in the near future.
Thank you, Jay.